There's one argument we always have: goaltending. Now, that being said, I'm going to do the top 20 defensemen in the NHL soon, so get your downvotes ready. Now, last year I did a top 31 tandems in the league, and some people got kind of upset. I'm not going to do that this year. No, I'm going to add to it with the whole debate of just how important is goaltending. And if your answer is, well, it's majorly important, you're probably right. But we'll go through it, and I'll go through each of the 31 teams, and I've attached arrows and where the teams finished, and how did I decide how to distribute teams on this board? Simple. The Islanders had the best save percentage in the NHL as a team last year. San Jose had the worst. So we're going from best to worst, and there's no room for me to put in my own 2 cents until we get to this part. So the New York Islanders got to round 2 this year. They're going to drop because going from Leonard to Varlamov to me is kind of a drop. Not only that, but they really had like lightning in a bottle working for them. And with goaltending, that's hard to replicate 2 years in a row. So I'm going to say the Islanders probably don't finish first in save percentage. This goaltending was really important to get them to the playoffs. This was a team that wasn't an explosive offensive juggernaut by any stretch. But the goaltending, the save percentage, just the attention to defense was so important that you can't understate Leonard and Greiss and their ability to get this team to the playoffs and make them respectable again. Dallas finished second. Bishop and Hudobin had very good seasons. Hudobin gets kind of forgotten. His win-loss record wasn't as good, but when he was in net, they didn't suffer. He was excellent. They, of course, got to round 2. What's going to happen with them this year, I think a lot of it's going to be affected by how healthy Bishop can stay. That's always the question mark with Bishop, right, is injuries. He seems to get injured a lot. And then when you throw Hudobin in, and for whatever reason he doesn't get the goal support that Bishop does in Dallas. So we'll see how things work out. But that's an okay one. And you'll notice too, might as well mention this, if a name's in red, it's because they were brand new additions in this offseason. Which brings us to Tampa, which is where it gets weird. Vasilevsky, and it looks like McElhinney will be the backup, which means Louis Domingue is kind of left hanging. They're not going to carry 3 goaltenders. So they were out in the first round. They were swept in the first round, and a big part of the reason why? Columbus is goaltending. So goaltending is very important. That being said, Vasilevsky really gets underrated when it comes to how important he was to Tampa. And Domingue came up big for them as well. I'm surprised at how much people talk about Tampa's goaltending not being very good, and they're bailed out by the rest of the team. But then look at their blue line and tell me, did Tampa really have the best blue line in the league? Because they've done some changes on their blue line in the offseason as well. So, it can't, both can't be true. You can't have a mediocre blue line and mediocre goaltending and yet have your goaltending put up really good numbers. So Vasi was pretty good. Domingue was pretty good as well. And now McElhinney's in there as well. McElhinney had a save percentage of .913 for Carolina this year. I don't see any reason why you can't have that and higher for Tampa. It means that if something happens with Vasi, if he gets hurt, McElhinney can step in, just like Domingue did last year. It's odd for Louis Domingue, isn't it? He's not on the board, and it feels wrong. Nashville, it'll be Rene and Saros. I expect less starts for Rene, more for Saros as they start the process of handing him over the reins as the starter. Nashville goes out in round 1, and you can make the argument, and it would be accurate, that Bishop outplayed Rene. And Rene has now had 2 playoffs in a row where he's looked very vulnerable and very human. And so Nashville's made some changes. They trade out Subban's contract in part so they can bring in Duchesne. We'll see if their defensive numbers hold up. They should. Dante Fabro looked pretty excellent when he got called up late. So, really with Nashville, a lot of it's going to depend on Rene holding off Father Time for another year during a regular season. But again, the top 4 teams all make the playoffs. And the top 5 teams make the playoffs. Murray and DeSmith. And Matt Murray's kind of a forgotten guy at this point. His numbers have been pretty solid. And Casey DeSmith comes in as a guy that nobody realized who he was. And he was pretty good. Tristan Jarry is still waiting his turn as well. And I think there's still some offense, or still some NHL, I should say, upside there. There's no offensive upside to a goaltender. My turn, I'm going. Where are you going? Okay. Only goaltenders wearing rollerblades and Chilliwack do that. Okay. Murray DeSmith, round one. It's a meetup joke. Murray DeSmith, I like that tandem a lot, and I think it's underrated. If I was ranking tandems, that one would be pretty high. Ranta and Kemper. So this is where it gets tricky because I think Arizona's going to be better as a team. I think they're going to score more goals. But I also think Darcy Kemper had a career year. I think he had a career year, and I think Ranta being able to stay healthy is a question mark. So I do expect them to kind of fall this coming year, and of course they missed the playoffs. So this is the first team out of the playoffs, and this is 6th on the board of overall goaltending save percentage. Just going by save percentage. I know there's a lot of people who don't like that number, but there isn't a number we're going to agree on. It's just not there. Boston is in at 7th with Rask and Halak. They go to the finals. I'm going to go ahead and say that number that they're going to drop this year. Rask definitely benefited from playing less games. Halak just had a career year as well. I don't expect Halak to put up those kinds of numbers again. His numbers were actually better than Rask's. And if Halak drops to his normal standard, we'll see Boston more in this range than up here. Winnipeg, Hellebuck, and Brossoit. And who would have expected that Brossoit is the reason that this team's still in the top 10? Brossoit had an amazing season. I don't really expect him to replicate it, but Connor Hellebuck had a really challenging year. He did not have a great season. And especially, the team was meandering towards the end of the season, and he had his poor games in there as well. So I expect them to get... Okay, so Brossoit, I expect him to drop a bit. Hellebuck to get a little bit better. I figure it's going to be about the same. They go out in round one. Part of the reason they go out in round one is better goaltending by St. Louis, mostly. There were a couple of rough games in there for Binnington. We'll get to Binnington. But Winnipeg, in general, was facing goaltender that was who was playing better hockey than theirs in that first round series. Anaheim. So we're up to a team that missed the playoffs as well. Every Anaheim fan will tell you it was not Gibson's fault, and it was not Ryan Miller's fault. Miller had an excellent year when he played. Gibson, when he played, was excellent as well. Anaheim had major problems with injuries to goaltenders. They missed the playoffs. Gibson did his best to try to drag them there. Early in the year, he was absolutely fantastic. His numbers faded a little bit. But notice, Anaheim's still in the top 10. And so is Toronto. So for all of the discussions about how bad Garrett Sparks is, and I'm not going to get into that here, and the question mark now with Michael Neuwirth getting a tryout, does he actually end up being the backup? Is Sparks on his way out? There's been all kinds of rumors of Sparks being on his way out. The best way to make Sparks get traded is to have him in this video. So he's in this video with Toronto. And of course, they go out in round one. And Tuukka Rask is a big reason why they went out in round one. So again, when people talk about goaltending, it is vastly important. Number 11 on this list is Price and Kincaid. So Kincaid, you'll notice in red. Left for dead by the New Jersey Devils. They trade him off to Columbus. Columbus sits him up in the press box and goes, you can sit up there and you can help us out in practices here and there. You're not seeing the net. And he never did. So Kincaid, coming off of a poor season, is still the better option from Niemi. And the perception was that because Niemi was brutal, they couldn't give Price a rest when they needed to. And that may very well be why they missed the playoffs. If Price gets a rest and you have better backup goaltending, they probably knock out Columbus and get in the playoffs. And then who knows? You look at how many upsets there were. Montreal might be coming off of a run to the third round going into this year. So that's why Kincaid's in there. And they didn't decide to keep Niemi. Colorado, it looks like it'll be Grubauer and Francouz as the backup, unless something changes. They go out in round two against San Jose. San Jose being the exception to the rule on this board. Grubauer had an amazing first round against Calgary. The Avalanche in general had an amazing first round against Calgary. And Francouz looked good in a call-up during the year. So I don't have any concerns that they're going to drop. You'll notice there's no down arrow next to Colorado. Because I don't think they're going to drop. I could understand if people are going to say, oh, they're going to drop. Except that Varlamov was not the reason that they're where they're at here. Varlamov had a save percentage of .905 during the season. Carolina, I think, is going to drop this year. Mrazek had an amazing year for the most part. And James Reimer has had a lot of challenges over the last few years. I want to be wrong on this one. Just want to throw that out there. I want to be wrong on this one. They make it to round three, of course, in part because Mrazek and McElhinney are excellent in tandem and replacing each other. And this was quite the run for Carolina. We get caught up in the storm surge, the bunch of jerks talk, and all this, but their goaltending saved them on a lot of nights this year. St. Louis. What's the big change in St. Louis? Why are they above the halfway mark? Because Jake Allen gets benched and Binnington goes in. Allen was having a really tough season. Binnington comes in, wins a ton. They win the Stanley Cup in no small part due to Binnington, who arguments can still be made, could have and should have won the Conn Smythe. And I get why Ryan O'Reilly won it. I'm not trying to take anything away from Ryan O'Reilly. I'm just saying you can make an argument that in their wins, Binnington was fantastic. And I made that argument during the playoffs, and I'm going to leave that there for now. I think they're going to go up. I think on this board next year at this time, they're higher. I'd be very surprised if St. Louis isn't in the top 10. Binnington looked really good. And you can say it's a hot streak. Maybe it is. Maybe they fall back to earth. Maybe he's not that good. But he's pretty darn good. Vegas, right around middle of the pack. Vegas's problem was they overplayed Fleury. So they go out in the first round. Fleury had games during that first round where he didn't look fantastic. And that's going to happen. The biggest question mark with Vegas, there's two of them actually. One, do they overplay Fleury again? By which I mean, do they have any faith in Subban? And two, is Fleury going to start showing signs of aging here? Are we going to start seeing his numbers suffer as he gets older? That's a question that's out there. He is 16 years away from his draft year, and so we're getting to that point where he's got a lot of miles, and it's going to be tough for them. But I don't have Vegas dropping or anything. Vancouver, surprisingly middle of the pack to some, I'm sure. Not surprising to Canuck fans who watched Markstrom this year. He played great behind a crap defense. Demko, when he played, was fantastic behind that same crap defense. This number, they would be higher on this list, other than Nilsson kind of drags it down a little bit. Nilsson had a really challenging year with Vancouver. Of course, they tried to trade him and get McKenna and send McKenna to the minors, and Philly goes, we'll take McKenna, and then Vancouver didn't have anybody for the American League. It was just a disaster. But now that's in the past, and we're looking at Markstrom and Demko. I fought the urge to put an up arrow next to them because it's Vancouver. People are going to say it's a team he cheers for, so of course he's going to have an up arrow next to Vancouver, even though I have the down arrow next to Boston. But this is an underrated tandem that I think is going to be interesting as the year goes along, because Demko could steal the job. Demko looked so good at the end of the year. I could see him stealing the job from Markstrom, 100%. Washington, Holtby and Copley, they go out in round one. Of course, the Canucks missed the playoffs. Everybody knows that. Holtby didn't look like Holtby this year. Something seemed a little bit off, and it continued right into the playoffs. And when you've won a Stanley Cup in 2018, it's pretty easy to look like you're a level below that in 2019. So they go out in round one. I expect a huge bounce back. So I'll go ahead and do this because, I expect a bounce back from Holtby. He's in a contract year, so I would expect him to play better. And this is going to be interesting to see what happens with them. Columbus, they're middle of the pack. I don't think that's going to continue. And you know what's funny is that Korpisalo had a rough year. He did. I don't think he established himself as being a starter going into this season. He could blow us all away. Look at the Islanders. Goaltending's tricky with the ebbs and flows and all. Merzlikins, I don't know. I don't. Because until a goaltender plays in the NHL, you don't know. You don't know who's going to be dominant and who's going to be a doormat. There's no way to tell. So for Columbus, I don't see how they stay middle of the pack with their goaltending, which makes it more of a challenge to reach the playoffs. Because once you get below Columbus from this year, who had Bobrovsky, and while the numbers aren't great, Bobrovsky had an amazing run that last 20, 30 games, and he dragged them into the playoffs. He was fantastic. So they drop, it's going to be tougher to make the playoffs, because under here, only 2 teams make the playoffs. In save percentage, anybody who finished below Columbus in save percentage, only 2 of them make the playoffs. So you've got Minnesota, who don't make a change. It looks like it's going to be Dubnyk and Stalock again. They finished out of the playoffs. Lundqvist and Georgiev for the Rangers. An interesting tandem in that Georgiev probably gets more starts this year. and Lundqvist probably gets less, as he still remains committed to this rebuild. But they missed the playoffs. Then you've got the Calgary Flames, Riddick and Talbot. Flames fans don't like me talking about their goaltending. I get it. The problem was Riddick, regardless of the reason, he did have a lot of challenges that second half of the year. There are still questions about him as a full-time starter in the NHL and whether or not he's that guy. They go out in the first round and they replace Mike Smith with Cam Talbot, which I think is a trade down. Again, Talbot had a really challenging year. I think his quality starts number was 28.1%, something in that range, and it was brutal. So right around Kincaid numbers. Kincaid and Talbot both had really poor numbers when it came to quality starts. So that's why they were available, and that's why they're cheap pickups. I do have concerns because with Calgary, if Riddick struggles, if Riddick gets hurt at all, is Gillies going to be the guy? Is Parsons, I don't think, is ready yet, so there's a lot of question marks I have with Calgary, which is part of the reason why I'm expecting them to kind of fall back, not out of the playoffs, but fall out of first or second in the conference. Buffalo, Hutton and Olmark, neither of them established themselves as a go-to starter this year. Buffalo missed the playoffs. That was part of the problem. There were other problems in Buffalo, but that was part of it, and they haven't really changed anything in the offseason. Detroit, Howard and Bernier. Howard had good runs in there. That being said, I think Jimmy Howard's best days are probably behind him. Bernier, he tries, but his win-loss record is terrible. And even though he had some good numbers in some of those losses, Detroit missed by a mile. LA, you've got Quick and Campbell. Jonathan Quick, of course, struggling with injuries this year. I don't think he was the best goaltender for the Kings. So when I did the top 10 goaltenders, and people were like, where's Jonathan Quick? And I thought, he didn't play as well as Peterson did in his call-up. I didn't think he established himself as being that much better than Campbell after he came back either. I think when you're not that much better than the other goalies on the team, I think that's a worry. And for Quick, injuries are a worry as well going forward. And, of course, they missed the playoffs. Chicago, who I have an up arrow next to because I expect them to get a lot better this year. Whether it's Crawford being healthy enough to be the starter or Robin Lehner coming in with something to prove and a burr in his side because the Islanders wronged him. He just wanted to go back to New York. He wanted to stay with the Islanders, and they go in another direction with Varlamov. They give 4 years to Varlamov. Lehner on a 1-year prove-it contract with Chicago. I expect really good numbers. And remember, Cam Ward was their backup. I know Delia is still number 3 in that lineup. I think that Delia and Lehner means that if Crawford isn't able to play very much, if concussion issues continue to plague him, they're okay. I expect Chicago to be a lot better. Chicago actually kind of scares me as potential playoff team this year. Anderson and Nilsson for Ottawa, respectable, decent enough, but they missed the playoffs. Koskinen and Smith. So you got the Oilers down here. This is my biggest issue with the Oilers for the most part. There's a lot of issues in this lineup, but Smith is to me an upgrade. They had Stolarz down the stretch after they traded Talbot, who got very little time. Stolarz is just nowhere right now. I think he's a UFA right now, isn't he? And Koskinen, I'm not sold on him as a starter, which is why I don't have an up arrow next to the Oilers, because even though Smith is an upgrade, I think Smith's going to end up starting more games than the Oilers may necessarily want him to. Because I'm not sold on Koskinen. Koskinen's kind of middle of the road. His numbers were okay. He'd have a good run followed by a bad run, and you can look at it and go, well, that was a bad run because he's with the Oilers. Okay, fine. Philly, I expect Philly to be a lot better. 110% expect Philly to be a lot better. Carter Hart for a full season. He's got to be the starter. So starter Hart, and Elliott is the backup. So with starter Carter and Elliott, I expect them to be better as long as Elliott stays healthy. If he doesn't, they'll just bring in 6 other goalies and we'll have another Philadelphia goaltender party. I'm hoping that their constant shifting of who's in net is over with Carter Hart in there. Just because I'm not a Philly fan doesn't mean I want to keep seeing more and more and more goalies go through Philly. I want to see Hart do really well. New Jersey, Schneider and Blackwood, of course, they missed the playoffs in no small part due to goaltending. Kincaid struggles. Schneider goes over a calendar year without a win. And Blackwood played well in the beginning. He played well at the end. He had some down points in the middle. I'm not sure where Mackenzie Blackwood fits into this. Does he play starter? Is he going to be a good enough starter to get New Jersey into the playoffs? This is my prime concern with New Jersey, is how well their goaltending plays. I do expect them to finish higher than 29th, which is where they are on the save percentage chart from last year, because they'll be able to score more goals. Their defense is going to be better, but their goaltending to me is still a concern. Florida's going to get better. You have to. This was a miserable year for Florida. Luongo's injuries, and then when he did play, he had some good stretches, but he had some brutal ones. And Reimer had some outright awful stretches in there too. So you would see Florida score 3-4 goals, have a pretty good game offensively, and at the other end, the goalies weren't saving anything. It was an embarrassment, and I totally get why they went all in on Bobrovsky, and Montembeault won that backup job with how well he played down the stretch. Montembeault, if you didn't see him because nobody was watching Florida games down the stretch, he's a pretty good goaltender. He'll be perfectly fine as the backup if they play him 20 to 25 games. I don't think he'll hurt them. And then at the bottom of the list, and an up arrow next to them as well, as San Jose. It was a miserable year for Martin Jones. It was a miserable start to the playoffs as well. They're down 3-1 against Vegas, and then they win 3 in a row. And after that, Jones seemed to get his confidence back. He still had some shaky games against St. Louis, but in general, he played pretty well. Aaron Dell is still a concern, though. Dell had a miserable year, so I expect them to be better, only because they're not the 31st ranked tandem in my eyes. But the save percentage tells you they are. And this is the only team in this row. This is the only team that made the playoffs. And of course, they go to round 3 just to throw the whole thing out of whack. They should have been out in the first round, and they weren't, if you just look at the goaltending aspect of it. So they need better years from Jones and Dell, or else San Jose could realistically find themselves in a tough position to stay in the playoffs. They can't have bad back-to-back years, which is why I think that if Jones is poor out of the gate, Doug Wilson will be looking to fix that quickly. They cannot afford to have another year like this. I think Doug Wilson realizes they dodged a bullet with that, and the likelihood of them being able to do it 2 years in a row is very slim. Out. If your goaltending doesn't hold up, if your defense is the reason, and a lot of people are going to say that's bad defense too, but if your goaltending doesn't hold up, you're likely not going to make the playoffs. And if you have really good goaltending on a team that misses the playoffs, all you got to look for is goal scoring, and you're better. And Arizona and Anaheim are 2 classic examples of exactly that, where they had all kinds of goaltending, the goal scoring wasn't there. And it was downright sad for Arizona. And you can add Montreal if you want to go down as low as 11th. You can add Montreal and say if they had more goal scoring, again, they were so close, just a couple more goals, and maybe a little bit better of a backup so that Price could get some more rest, you get some more results, and we're talking about Montreal, the playoff team. So we'll see what happens this year. Let me know what you guys think. Who's the best tandem? There's the question. Who's the best tandem? And which tandem overachieved and ends up falling back to earth this coming season? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through and just happened upon this video while you're browsing on the internet. And I'll talk to you again soon.